Panel operating screen lines the high centers of surface location system off the traction is directing line lines. How we come into the purpose of existing to its existence. The purpose of everything is already here. Checked imbalances, lines calculate, modify, coding lines, configuration system, author travel, directing lines, imagination core, communication line, alter state lines, and all communication setting is creating everything through its anomaly, creating those alter states of your egos. The process of communication, how you use that in all the levels in the creative system, the intuitive system, okay, to do its intuition. Knowing exactly how to modify that is to understand that. And once you get in that position, okay, to systems, you start to understand how to more control everything around your system. Not just what's everything inside, but what controls everything outside. You control inside, everything controls outside. Control outside, everything controls inside. And that's all it is. And understand that, you use it through the VR system, to the AVR settings. So, what we have to identify is how to keep everything under control. What we control, what we can't control. Okay, is identifying what you aren't, is identifying what you are as you come into all levels of what you already achieved and received. And it's all connected to system, how you use your alpha and your betas, your thetas, and your megas, zeta, zeta, gamma, radiation line communication system, highlights the surface. But what keeps everything all together is how to keep your mind in the altered state of where you are in your seconds, minutes, and hours and frame. This helps you and guides you, using everything through remote control. Controlling what you're doing, controlling what you're seeing, controlling what you're operating. And it's all done through schematics. It's all done through a window frame. Just a window frame. It doesn't matter how you see it in any angles in set position, because it's already set in tractions. As you see yourself in conversion, high line settings and sequence, cross indication lines of grounds, you're looking at line communication setting and high travels, into graphic communication screens. So set position one corner, set lines of two corners and tractions, directing inside, inline, outside line conditions at traction locations, time measure, time scale. Okay, cross indication lines, bending space, or three centers in rotation system, travel point lines graph, inside, outside lines into dimensional sail and rotation. Okay, coordinate the communication lines of high centers, sets course centers, lines of travel, direct lines and link, and patterns and recognition of time frame. Indicates lines of clocking lines of zero, rotates the system and all the calculations. It's all through imagination, guys. It's all it is, nothing else. But more controlling your system. Hola, ¿cómo estás? What you have to identify is the nothing observation. You're observing everything every single time you're looking at everything. And you're understanding your future line, which is always existing information system. You looking at everything and everything looking at you. Process and position of the box. Box is looking at you in center, three centers of travel. But you're also looking too in set position of three centers of travel, back in signal. Okay, set position to your flux in capacitor location. Okay, so understanding that, then the actual set position understands the levels of you, then you go into the actual box frame itself, which is its intelligence. Now that grounds your sequence and how you see the provision location system to your computer. There's your computer. Boxing frame course centers, tethers lines of screen, adaptation lines of flux over line screen location system, all through travel, all through locations. Okay, that's one big massive computer. Now this is where we come into the Xylons. Now Xylon is information system and application system with what's online communication setting to your ciphers and your communication setting to your cipher communication setting and travels and that course center communication and conversion. Okay, and set position of its operation. Okay, in that calculation setting, opens all windows and frame communication system all through travel. Okay, very powerful stuff in set positions, right? Set lines, communication lines, XC1000 and platform. Directing ground centers, calculate lines of earth, rotation, surface, and travel. Indirect and redirect line signal location system. As you are in the center op, line condition setting, teleportation, ground center line condition setting, crop circles, location system, all through travel. Sets calculated and modified screen line adaptations of flux over lines, flux over screens, and flux notification system, and temperature readings and travel. Open signals, inside rotation, and travel communications. Time reactors, inside lines of communication. Okay? Inside rotation, inside traction. All through scale, all through measure, all through set position, through operation. So remember, you always focus on one focal point. That's what I'm focusing on. So you look at the expansion, And look at all those windows that you can open up at each time sequence, each time panel. And you're always in observation every single time. And it doesn't matter how you look at it, you just have to understand you're working within that focal point of a door. And then you set positions here, bringing that in, set tractions to another door in sequence of somebody coming out of the door. But it's process and how to use that information system all through travel and direction. Okay, into scales of communication. Flights, rotation line grounds, high line sequence location setting of travel, an open window. Process the open window is an open shutter of its window itself. Coming in that position lines of high centers, process communication setting in road graph screen location system and traction. Directing ground centers, high line sequence, and screen adaptation setting of solar panels. High signal location setting, open lines of flux, take direction location system all through travel. Okay? So you work on one focal point, look what you created in set traction. Okay? And then you move on to the next one, see? Look at the expanding you have. And the more you can focus on this, just focus on the triangulation. Right? And then when you work inside and you set up anything in formula equations, one setting, one traction, one division, one location, the calculation of screen adaptations of flux over line, rotation, setting, and travel. Okay, rotate the cycles, change formation lines of grounds. Okay, set calculate split lines of anomaly, 3 travels and communications. Okay, now you see the blinds, now you see the shutters. Here's the blinds. Okay. All right, and you're observing everything which you already created in modification, inside, outside line condition setting and travel. Okay? Or you can set it through a grid line and screen adaptations of flux. Or you can bring an open line window panel process of communications of flux. And you're always observing everything you're putting in. Seconds, minutes, and hours, change frames, communication lines, direct signal, and location system, all through traction, all through locations. And settings. Okay? You like what you've done. Look what you see. Okay? Transformation lines of grounds, calculation system, all through travel. Intelligence watching you. So it's the reverse. Here's the eyes and sequence. Ha ha ha! Bring it in through calculation screen line adaptation. Right? Or you can change the coloration lines, the eye line sequence, high line position lines of pattern, process communication system all through travel. Okay, step it out, there it is. Okay. Create imaginations of everything you come into focal points. So you move on and set lines, move into another direct location system, open another line window, operation lines of panel, communication screen lines, adaptation of flux. You're constantly doing creations, line settings, lines alteration, line connection setting, the conversion system, no levels, a constant location setting, creating storage line, position, operation lines, and sequence. Now you can get in coloration lines if you want to do that in lines. Start off with the red line sequence. Set a triangulation lines of 1 over 3 over 6. Let's see what you've done in line rotations and travel. You work with that line screen. Process lines, angle point lines, over line signals, 0 line operation line sequence, and direct lines of grounds and high line communication setting, and 1/6 lines of anomaly. Processing indication over lines of flux. Core centers, x2000 comes in platitude, inside rotation, outside rotation calculation setting. Okay? Bring it out, look what you created. Through alteration. Okay, we got 2 panels, operation lines, and wormholes. Clocking centers as travels. Directing ground centers and high line position location system. Purple operation line sequence, purple operation line, direct line condition setting, and space lines of anomaly. 4 signals lines of grounds, high line centers, and platitude location system all through travel. Sets calculation grounds, setting calculate modify, direct lines and position alteration lines at screen location system all through tractions. Okay, then you bring in x2000, process lines, overline sequence, ground centers, mapping sequence, 3 lines of grounds, high set location system, all through travel, all through mechanism location system. Mapping system, bringing in line, simulation grounds. Okay. Working with the ground line surface and location system to a mapping line center rotations. Directing grounds and high line sequence in panel operation. Sets calculation ground centers as surface. Okay, so I'm going to work with that with everything in purple and black and set location road graph screens. You bring that setting line and set location setting, set travel endpoint graph communication all through conversion system, bring it in the position of your intelligence, walking in the grounds of communication setting surface. All right, and you are in this color. You can be any color through observation. Okay, you like what you see, change formation grounds, change communication setting, change the altered state of mind, process the indication settings of flux over 3, over 6, over 12. Moves over signal lines of grounds, highlight signals, and location system with attraction. Bring it up, line communication, look what you created. So alteration of its ego. All right, change formations, sets travels, graph communication, screen lines, adaptation. And set calculation. All right? I just wanted to show you all the bandwidth that you can use in all formation systems all through travel. Because you're constantly creating different lines of calculation setting and window frames that's already set at location system through simulation system all through tractions, all through direction. And you work with the panel line centers, so that's communication high centers, circulation lines of 1, process location lines of 2, solar panels of 3-line rotations and travel. Solar connection system of surface and travel communications. Directing ground centers comes in line position of Pluto, in sequence and location. And we have modification grounds, calculating line centers, line connection setting all levels, cloak and dagger over line centers, and rotation of Saturn, and interference location setting of channel. High signal lines of grounds, calculate and modify, directing lines of green over sequence, center operation lines of location system, all through calculation modification grounds. All right, bring it out in set position. You like what you see. Turn out information lines of grounds and high lines of sequence. Okay. So that's communication high centers. Then you bring yourself in and set positions and set traction. You like it, you move on. Okay. So it's kind of like going through the grid lines into highways of travel, overlooking everything from below. Okay, you can see it's from below, right? So it's above and below, right? So it's all indicating in online centers how it communicates the system all through traction, locates the system, align position, location of its window frame. That process communicates inside and outside through traction. Directing ground centers services process lines of windows outside line condition setting of surface locations. Directing ground centers calculate and modify outside line track line condition set, observing outside line rotation and position location and surface in locations off the direction. Okay. So now you can observe inside and outside at the same time, all through set position. So you're just going around the board, alterating this, alterating that, alterating here, alterating there, and non-line centers and location system all through traction. Okay? But it's a lot more fun when you just get in position how to create it through the simulation setting and traction. All right, or anything, road grass screen locations. Another intelligence. So as I set the intelligence, the formations, grounds, and high lines of signals, location setting, and graph communication, moderate the system location of high centers, opens all signal location setting through a dimensional door and set lines of sequence. Process indication overline signals, calculation lines of blue, purple lines, outside set lines of communication. Then we go through red line centers, security lines of panels, and outside line condition system, all through traction. Then we get position lines of gold, overline sequence, overline panel, and process communication and projection in high settings. Very powerful stuff. Now I'm going to work with inside the position, location, and travel, all through its dimensional door. Okay, coloration lines of screens. Now you have to go back in space line, which is the void, so it doesn't overchannel the frequency lines of grounds, high center location setting, and convergent location system off the travel. So let's get in modification high centers, process lines of 1, indication over cross line condition setting as surface. Outline signals and location setting to your pyramid and rotation. Here's your pyramid. Work within that line centers, process indication system on travel. Solar connection settings into spot lines, probings and detection screen location. Outside signal, I like what I saw, line rotation. Okay. Archetypes are coming in line centers, information select lines, high center frames of travel, directing one way, operate line single location system all through calculation. Rotation grounds, high lines of signals, offline rotation to dimensional door, and lines of sequence. Calculate and modify, directing ground centers, path line registers of time frame, line center location system all through traction. Outside lines, like what I see, bring in position, observation lines over line sequence, and ground lines of surface. What I see through observation. Okay? Then I move on, right? But look what the expanding you can do. Okay? And you can change the platforms too. So wires of indication lines, thicker lines, screen adaptations of flux over line, rotation line centers, line communication system, up to structure, up to design lines. That mind wipes assist location setting, the imagination core that correlates the system alteration system all through traction. All right, and then you bring it in. Okay. Crossing angles of flux over line, inhibitors over line rotations, auxiliaries over inputs, outputs, and outline signals, and two graph communications. Row graph screens, set lines of 2 line signatures, 3 lines of signals, 4 lines of settings, process indication lines of pi position lines of time frame. Sets course centers of timeline sequence, location setting, and line cover centers of travel. Directing lines of modification lines, triangulation line communication data, process calculation greens, process location system of travel. Sets course centers of communication setting in the configuration system of the calculations. Inside rotation line service, and rotation line calculation setting and square root. Outline signals, look what you created in positions and modification. Change it at angles, see the platforms and set lines of screen. Okay, high signal locations. Now I'm going to set a highway. Highway is going to be line centers into graph communications over black over void. Setting process communication lines of angles of two line course centers of travel. Indicates ground centers set position locations of an A track, line condition A lines of C equals lines of D process lines of F, and F line rotations, holographic line screen, adaptations of flux, over line centers, and Fibonacci lines, square root location lines of pi. Process indication system, triangle lines and point graphs, and communication lines direct signals, and clock and line communication setting, and configuration system of face recognition of time frame. Inside line centers and rotation surface subtraction. All right? Then you move on. Okay? So you're constantly creating new mats through the alterations in your settings. So you're creating the alter egos. You're not alternating the egos. You're just creating platforms of different lines of communication. Automation settings. Okay, so once we get in that line signal, it's much easier to process. So let's get into box frame line centers, directing line links, and it indicates system of 3 lines of flux over 4 centers of travel and 2 lines of graph communications. Directing platforms over lines is setting through pi. Process indication lines of direct lines, triangulation, molecule line communication lines of pi. Sets course centers, line communications in the configuration system, 45 angles in travel communication. Okay. Road graphs, platitude, 4 centers of signal, and 5, 6 lines, 8 lines of cerebral cortex line, design line. Set operates lines, window frame, cross line condition setting, overline cross location system, and box frame. See, the box is off balance. So you got to balance at the flux line, gravitation line, screen adaptation, all along the earth line, rotation, surface, balance, communication, triangulation line, position, operates lines of sequence. Puts position lines of balance, process line condition setting, and the box is back and frame communication with the convergent system, also travel, direct line communication, alteration of its ego. Back in balance. Then you get position lines of windows and frame communication of its dimensional doors, setting signal location system, also tractions. Process lines of indication lines, door handles of 3 over 6 over 8 over 12 or 24 line position lines and sending into communications. Directing ground centers sequence, sets course centers line communication in that configuration. Directing time locks, high line signal location system, all through measure, all through scale, then sets communication system, all through box frame communication, all through position. So I'm showing you things that if you're not in mode control, you can see how everything's out of control. So to put everything back in control is understand how to use your frequencies and ground your systems, right? Triangulation here, but you do a triangulation here that's off balance. So you provide your system in D lines of factors over lines of solar sail. Not directing your clockings are going forward and metric meters and 45 angles in the set core center location of the cerebro. So processing that position location is bound outside the triangulation line condition setting, flux over line communication lines, high position location of travel, bounds communication system author calculations. Right? In that communications in string theory communication system all through solar panel. Process indicates lines and line condition setting and line communication system all through satellites. Sets 10-point lines of graph and 2-line signals and triangulation communication system all through setting operation through sequence. Triangulation. Remember, you always focus on one particular window. You said travel. Okay? Crossing angles, split lines of anomaly. Okay? Split lines of 3 lines of signal locations, lines of anomaly. Row graph screen, communication setting, high lines of surface. Okay? Temperature reading line course centers, directing lines of grounds, course center interference, bringing line position location, measure and scale. You're on top of the line communication of the simulation board. That's you, walking on the system. Process indication lines and line center location setting, going through location grid. Indicate grounds, high line signals, flux over line rotations, vortex back, rotation line connection setting, indicates grounds of communication center and service. Process indications into pink, and travel endpoint lines of graph, and set line communication, configuration system, and voice pattern communication. So we went from red to pink. Then you go through another location grid, set line course centers into pink over lines and screen adaptations of flux. Okay, so it's a communication system all through travel and direct lines of communication. Okay? And this is what you can do when you focus on one particular thing in subtraction. See yourself on the board. When you bring things in, guys, when you bring things in, see yourself on the board on different levels in location grid. Okay, very powerful stuff. And you could change the waving panels, process of indication setting, and 45 angle communications. Changing information lines and grounds. Because it's all in direct lines in the simulation ground and communication setting convergence. Or you can put yourself in up-down sequence location setting and travel. Process this way going down to set lines of communication. Or the 45 angles are going this way in line positions. Or 45 angles are going this way in that communication system. Right? So it's all about different angles into the game itself, attraction. Okay? But you focus on one particular window. And you like that? Now you can jump from one window to the next window. But now you get a collapsed timeline because there's a space bar. Bar breaks and time frame, space lines, anomaly, line connection, void. Over the line cross lines, a 2-line signal location system, auto conversion system, okay, and modified line connection, the port of defense line communication lines at default, sets implementation system, auto tracks and direct lines of vortex location system, auto travel. Sets calculation lines, timeline sequence, time calculation lines into parallels, location setting. Parallel course centers in torical fields, directing ground set lines of sequence, location system, auto attractions. Erasing lines anomalies of 3 travels in communication. Process and infinite triangulation line conditions of flux over lines, overline sequence location system lines of travel. Mechanism over 1, mechanism over 2, line condition setting and position lines of travel, and process communication setting of angles. That indicates the ground set locations and settings, operate line set locations box frames. Process the indication system author travel. Mechanism of force and rotation lines and set tractions. Force signals into an open window frame. Okay? Now you can jump in timeline and set lines of circle and rotate the system and track location setting, collapse timeline. Box frame, window frame. Process indication lines of grounds, position lines of 4 panels, second lines of course center circulation system, 1/6 lines of anomaly, rotation lines of surface. Indicates the grounds, calculate and modify, and travel communications. Inside, outside line condition setting, travel. All right. So it's amazing what you can do when you get in the positions all through travel. Okay. How you can vortex in another time frame and location setting to its parallel. So, and that's just one window to another window in frame, right? That's why you have to cloak and dagger everything, so it doesn't offline your set location of view existing already through alteration system, author connect track course, center position, future adaptation, existing information lines of grounds, portal communication setting and service that puts tall time frame, line center, and line connection system, author measure and scale that change the molecule structure, location setting, and 3-line communication setting and triangulation. High signals, location setting, author travel. Okay? And it's all done through simulation setting and attraction. Okay? Very powerful stuff. See? You You still have a lot of bandwidth to work with all through windows. So you go through each window. So when you go through windows, you're going through pixelation graphs, holographic line center, of course, centers the TV reception line, communication of plasma, interference location of TV line settings. This process indicates the system to all track locations. Okay, center course lines of channel, process lines of 4 signals, 3 centers of travel, communication lines of flux, triangulation lines over line, cross lines, operation line sequence, outline center line, condition setting, the configuration system, all through triangulation. Now we bring the depth line course, directing ground centers, line sync locations over cross line conditions at time measure and scale. Time elements come in line screen adaptations of flux. Process the platforms, E lines, E for line center rotation. Travel point lines of graph, line center E factors over 4 centers and sync location lines of waving patterns. Process indicates lines of ground centers, set position, earth line rotation, surface and travel. It rotates the cycles, line communicates consistent all through conversion. All through setting, all through operation. Okay, so we get in position location 3 lines of panels, process lines into over mass, over tractions over 3 line communication of signals. That rotates the cycle lines, heights, interference, and platforms over lines of E factors over screen. The 4 lines of signification setting to a traffic runway. Directing ground centers, inline sequence, location system, all through traction. Okay. Change formation of grounds and high lines of signal. Okay, platforms, course centers, interior position. All through mode control. Triangulation lines of 1 and triangulation lines of 2 over sequence. Okay, process indication lines of 3, flux over lines, pyramid activation lines, travels point lines of graph, indicate lines of grounds, and line center location system, all through travel, all position location mechanism. Sets travels in point lines of graph, simulation grounds, and set course centers of communication lines of space. There's your pyramid and 3 line signals, 1, 2, and 3. All right. Okay, so we go in hieroglyphic course, line direct signal, astral projections of travels, 45 angles, and 4 lines of flux over screen over platform. Directing platforms over E factors over line screen adaptations of travels and direct lines of link. Process indication system, all through contractions, all through directions, all through location. Okay? Constantly using pyramids, guys. 4 settings is 4 signals, location system. How to use your platforms, locations, and mode control. How to direct and line links. So every time you go into a new mapping, you come into each window of travel. And that's what your TV sets up when it's off, not when it's on. All right, so lines of position over blue, overline sequence over blue, over triangulation of flux. So it indicates lines of travel, okay? Creating its own anomaly of space-time of operation lines of sequence. Pattern direction timelines and frame communication overline sequence location settings. Indicates the grounds, height, centers of travel, and a pyramid rotation surface of travel. Okay? Remember, it's on its own operation of its own system. So you have to identify that and how to understand that. And what the TV is doing is creating its own pyramid of its own astral projections of its own travel. It is seconds, minutes, and it's hours in frame. All through tractions, all through locations. Okay? All through equation. All right, so let's get in the top of the pyramid line, rotation lines outside say location setting, calculation pixelation grounds, 30 seconds miles, rotation lines of 30 second location setting calculations. There's the pyramid. Out signal, location setting, all through configuration. All right, so we outline centers. We go in cloak and dagger, outline signal location system as service, and rotates the settings, outline rotation setting, track communications, and directions, right? Now, this is all inside a box TV. When it's off. When the TV's off, this is what's happening. So it's creating its own anomaly, line rotations. When you're sleeping or in that position, location, and calculation setting. Pixelation grounds, calculate, modify. All right, so once we open up the signals, then we go into security lines of panels, the process lines of platforms over 1, platforms over 2, platforms over 3, platforms over 4, and set travel. Ground centers, lines of platforms over E factors over 1, position of process calculation, green line adaptation lines, high position location of flux over screen. Directing ground centers, sequence location system, channels the operation line condition setting in traction. Online signals, high communications, high centers, rotates the system location setting in travel communications. Okay, so it's constantly creating structure of its design and set technology of its own system of travel. Okay? So once you understand the pixelation grounds, offline signals, and rotation lines of service that correlates the system all through time and measure and scale, outside line, inside rotations. outside line, inside rotations, and travel in that communication setting configuration. Now, understanding line centers, process indicates the setting all through travel. Okay? Through indication system, all through attractions. Okay? What the TV is creating. All right? Pixelation ground says snowy graph interference. Right over line left line connects in high center interference, high position discharge, coordinated calculation lines into northern lights. Rotate the cycles. Pyramid activation lines of 3 centers to travel in communication lines of force. Set line communicate inside rotations. Correlate the panels into strategy. Strategy comes in, particle line screen adaptations of flux. Change the parameters and parameters of its pyramid rotation system all through traction. Directing ground centers, online signals. Another triangulation comes in online center. Pyramid activation, another online center. And offline rotation in travel and communications. Configuration setting over line signals. And another triangulation flux over screen adaptation of ash projection. So it's set calculation green lines. Online centers and do flux over screen adaptations of flux location. All through simulation. Okay? So, this is what goes on when you turn off your TV. It does everything itself. It's on its own system, going through its own lifespan, as you have yours and it has his, or hers. So your TV could be a her or it could be a him, which is a polarity. So it's a male polarity you're dealing with or a female polarity, but not a gender screen adaptations. Get that out of the equations. Process indication lines, the ground lines, the online center line connection setting, configuration, pixelation, grounds, calculate, modify, pyramid outline, rotation lines, the triangulation, flux over line, rotation setting, travel, communication setting, all through convergence system, all through travel. Setting offline centers, rotation lines, the grounds, calculate and modify. Directing line lengths, set course centers and platforms over E factors over screen location. Sets communication high centers, operation line sequence, 45 angle split, lines of anomaly. Sets course centers, the timeline sync location of platforms over line. Sets operation line signals in rotation surface and travel in that communication setting in the triangulation system of its triangulation line condition of simulation grounds of communication. Okay? Structure of the building going down, structure of the building going up. So that's that calculation. Now we go into 3 lines of particles, 3 grounds of surface, and rotation lines of ground calculations. Coming into the void, over line cross, line condition setting, convergence system, all through box frame. Mediation graphs, waving screens, adaptations of flux over line, building line sequence, and 3 lines of measure and scale. Split lines anomaly into 4 centers of sectors, vectors, and quads, and rotation system to its building and rotation lines of its structure and mode control. There's the building. Booyah. So I'm just showing you how powerful it is when you get in direction. Okay, very powerful stuff in travel. And you see it on all different angles of communication. Right? All different angles on communication. All right, guys? So you have to understand how to remote control your system and set travel. All right, so there's always ways of looking at it in all formation setting and communication. All right, so it's pretty powerful stuff when you come in that position. Okay, so center ops, of course, centers calculate modified line condition and remote control line communication, surface location system attractions. Directing lengths, securities of panels, box line, 1 line, rotation line, second line, height interference of 4 lines, set location setting, triangulation lines of 1, triangulation of 2, and set traction. Directing ground centers is 0 operation, 0 correlation setting molecular lines, 2 atoms, rotation surface under line, rotations into solar spheres and location. Directing ground centers is server location system all through op and set to travel. Operation line sequence, sun of rotation setting is surface. Solar system and rotation line correlation setting and direct lines of 1 length, process 3 centers of angles, process lines triangulation, ground centers and line condition setting, 3 lines anomaly, rotation surface, structure of the building, travel. Okay, so we got a solar sphere on top of the building. And you can see it in all different angles and communication. So there's nothing you can't do through your mind that can come in information system, but it's knowing how to create it through a pyramid operation signal. Correlates to the flywheel, rotates the cycles. Now we go back in the void line, rotation lines, the set line, communication lines, the 0 gravity communication and conversion system all through travel. Sets rotation spins in set line communication setting at surface. Rotates the cycles, high centers and line condition setting, pyramid activation line 1 signal rotation setting. Sets off signal location setting as sonar echo. Course centers of 4 lines of travel, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scales, and data ports, and windows, frames, and rotation surface and travel. Now, directing line signals in a 45 angle communication setting and calculation. Spin cycles, sets course centers in position of the body frame, has to get in mode control. Directing grounds, an online sequence, flux over line, cloak and dagger, and sequence locations. Going around the solar sphere in rotation. Same angle points and 3 lines of 4 over flux over 7. Position lines of time sequence lines and dividing. Rotation 1, 1, process lines of 0. Correlates the setting and travel in the solar direct locations and remote control. And direction. So, spinnacles, course centers, non-equal line center, directing ground center, calculate and modify, line setting and structure of design lines into position, location, measure, and scale communication lines of travel through an open window frame. Process indication setting as simulation grounds and high calculation. Work within that system, all through settings. Let's just work with that set correlations. TV frame, observer over here, watching setting, setting skyline grids into solar panel, process indications over lines, crossing grids in 3 centers, crossing grids in 3 rotation center to travel through graph, operate lines, I like what I've done, and set position. Change course lines of time frame. Sets communication high configuration system, all through weaving and travel. Overlooking the sun, okay, and time zone. Sets communication to ground lines and sequence location. Process indication here, overline signals. Cross lines of here, inline set location setting to 2 lines of measure and scale. Cross lines of indication setting over line cross lines. Operation line sequence into high position location system, all through time zone. Process indication lines of grounds, online centers, and rotation surface location setting to the sun and the moon rotation. Process indication lines of grounds and that communication in the configuration setting. Waving screens, rotate line cycles, and rotation line connection and graphic calculation. Intelligence formation of 2 lines of formation system of intelligent rotation lines and ground line communication time zone. Sets course centers of travel, and direct lines lengths, and line communication setting and conversions. Calculate and modify, line direct signals, ground communication overline signal location system, all through travel. Okay. But it's amazing how you coordinate that in online communication. Okay. Constant alteration egos, not changing the mind state of its ego. That's all you do in a position, right? So it sets you free in different lines of windows. The frames of any levels of all communication setting, how you see that in all formation system, all through travel. Okay. All right, so modified line centers, but look what you can create location setting calculations. All right, absolutely amazing when you bring it in set positions, overlooking the sun and the moon, right, through time zone, right? So you basically have to understand how this all works in set position. If there's nothing perceiving through consciousness, there's nothing coming in, you're just observing everything, right? But to understand these things, if you're not bringing your thoughts or action emotions, you're just a mind and all line positions, all levels of just empty space itself. Just empty space, that's it. Nothing else. Just empty space, there's nothing coming in. The only thing that comes in is that you come in and set position. So when you come into graph communication setting. Let's say you want to bring in a house. Let's bring the change formation lines of grounds and high lines of sequence. All through setting. You start with that set correlations, right? And you work with the structure design line. Okay, set positions. You're already in coloration. Okay, you bring it in your house. Okay, so that's all identified into your mind imagination. Okay, now you're in the house. Now you got a walkway. All right, so there you are. That's your house, right? So if there's nothing there, it's that position. It's just empty space until you bring things in. And it's always going to be empty space. But it's controlling your thoughts and your actions, how you come into the creating line communication, alter egos, the process of communications, how you come into configuration settings, how you're constantly creating costumes of stories So you don't mind alterate your system already in traction. Okay, so there's nothing to perceive until you understand how to come into your own consciousness. And that's where you surrender to everything through its current of its flow. And then you start understanding what makes it rain. Okay, what makes it rain come in? Okay, what makes it rain? Let's get into signal locations, sending it track locations. Okay, and at positions. All right, what makes it rain? Okay, and once you identify that, you wipe it out on screen. Bring it in set position of disappearing. Right, so nothing's there until you bring it in. Nothing's there to perceive, but it's how you perceive and it's how you bring things in through the creative cycles that you are, through intuitive of the intuition system, all through attractions. And you do it through your coloration lines of light that modifies your system in all those settings. Okay, so let's say that's you in set attractions. All right, and you come into, let's say you want a piece of pizza. All right, so pizza's right there. It comes into its image first. It doesn't travel. Okay, so it just comes into the setting. Okay, here's that piece of pizza. Okay, so and then you coloration lines, the calculation screens. Okay, putting pepperoni on the pizza. Okay, now once you get in that positions, you create it through an anomaly, through the spectacles of you, and understanding what you're doing through alterations. You're creating that communications and setting. You're creating an alter ego of its system, because pizza is an alter ego of itself. If it doesn't have its alter ego, you're not creating it through a story. Your mind altering the story in set positions. Okay, but that's what you're doing. You're bringing in the vision of the pizza, and the pizza, once you get in positions, is there in attractions. Okay, it's there now in attractions. Okay, so when you get there, in that positions, you hear and travel. Okay, and there's the pizza. Okay, so that's basically how it works in the mind of collaboration setting attraction. Okay, if not, you're just all levels of just empty space. There's nothing there to perceive. That's how fast things come in. Really fast, like you wouldn't believe. Okay, but if you're not perceiving anything, if you're not coming to anything of thought, because the thought basically comes into the action to its emotional setting, but you have to understand how you're going into, you don't want to mind alterate the setting because it's already set up in vision. What the brain is already set up the conversion, when it's already set up in the body through projection. So that's what you don't want to get confused of, is always just coming to creating and stop coming to alterations of its ego. You don't want to create an alteration of an ego because it overrides you already existing in the sim through my school of modification of moderation. It's attractions. Okay? That's how fast your thoughts come in. So if you're not perceiving thoughts, action, emotions, there's nothing there. Just empty space. All right? So once you understand that, this is what your body has to come into. Okay? I'm going to make it very well clear so you get a true understanding how this all works and set position to your settings, because it's just a body capacitor that holds its data as a storage facility in set position. You are just empty space. There's nothing perceiving through thoughts, action, emotions. Right? Nothing's there, just empty space, just the void. And the only thing that you hear is you, nothing else, until you bring it in. Then you brought something in, right? What is that? If you don't know what it is, something else comes in, different color. What is this? What is that? All right, so you're bringing things in, but you're manipulating your minds. You have no idea what you're doing until you identify what you're doing. And once you know what you're doing, everything disappears. Back in setting, back in balance of operation of you just existing and evolving yourself. Booyah. Back together. Okay? So one more time. Anything you bring in, anything a road graph screen, adaptation lines of settings, hide lines of sequence, location setting, anything to panel, anything operates like anything to your friends. Your friends don't come in, but they automatically come in vision right away. Okay, here's your friend. Okay, there's your friend right there, right? So once you bring that in, it comes out. It comes out. All right, let's bring it in set lines communications. It comes out of setting. Okay, and there it is. There's the platform and set lines of communication in set location, which are brought in location system multi-conversion. Your friend. Okay, so if there's no friend, you're just an empty space. Again, empty space. That's all it is. Empty space. Okay, if not, it's all conversion and confusion. Bring it back in setting, bring it out, personal line connection system, author travel. No more friends. Change formation lines of grounds, put it back in void, and set position to its operation sequence. That puts all communication setting of its conversion system author tractions. That processes every location system author applications. Okay? That's what you guys have to truly understand. Because it's all done through its equation. Now you're just identifying it through mode control. And set locations. All through provision, all through travel, all through calculation screen lines, adaptations of flux. Okay? So if we get to truly understand how this all works, then we get to truly understand how we come into our vision lines and understand the cortex location of the codification system all through codex. Understand imagination setting to our mystical cortex, which is very powerful, which is imagination of theta, that connects the three grounds of setting lines of three line rotation, strangulation line, position of the order line, set location of Y line, screen equal line, communication lines of box, of flux core centers into Fibonacci lines of one cycle, one traction, one division, one location, one travel, one communication setting highlights the surface. So we got a 3 lines of Y, process lines of 3 over 6, over lines of setting, over line connection 6, over lines of 9, over lines of 12, that sets lines of 24 measure and scale. Calculate line position 144 flux, set calculation lines of high position 144 flux, process line core centers back in 0, core centers back in 0, correlation back in 0, and rotation lines of pi. Okay? So everything I say is a central communication setting that processes everything how you come into your own voice. And that communication setting, you understand how to see through triangulation in, and how to see triangulation of out. Okay, processing and line centers of your thoughts going out and your thoughts going in set position. Again, through box. Thoughts going out and thoughts going in. Okay, out and in, guys. That's what you have to process. All right. Because if you can identify it, then you're creating ultra versions of yourself that's overriding your sequence of what you've already created through the alter egos of your costumes, through story framing. Your self-telling, the operations are readjusting you. Story, nothing else. So stop creating the alterations of your egos and now understand how to go through triangulation box or any of the information of flux, over square root over pi, or anything is Starlink and communication setting to travel. Right? Directing lines of grounds, understanding what's going in, and understanding what's going out in set position. Understand? And if you understand that, there's the flux, there's the balance. There's the process of communication setting, all through configured system, all through yin and yang. It gets in communication lines of balance. And once you get into balance, you balance out your grounds, you balance out locations, you balance your lines, position, location, measure, and scale. Communication high centers to tither, communication lines of 3 line centers, 6 lines of measure over scale, platforms over 1 over rotation, settings and travel in point lines of graph communication and galaxy alignments. Galaxy all communication sending configuration system, all through travel and direct lines of link. All through structure, all through design. In your simulation. Okay? There's your pyramid. You're always working with a pyramid. Everything you structure is a pyramid. You have to, because it's putting your alterations into your egos through the creative cycles and the intuitive systems. And it calculates, modifies how you use your chakras of 0, position 1 over 2 over 3 over 4 over 5 over 6, 7 calculation lines over 8, process lines of 9, sets travels in position over 10, set lines 11, 12 lines of position of panel, process calculation lines of balance. So it doesn't matter what you do, you're just balancing everything you already know. From 0 flux, 1 center, 2 travels, 3 lines of grounds, 4 lines of flux, 5 lines of signal, location setting, 6 lines of measure. There's your pyramid track location. Okay? And then you go through the film strip and set design lines and screen definition. Okay? So the avatar comes here, sets up the panel. Your body goes through frame by frame by frame by seconds, minutes, hours, through remote control. Right? And again, it does it again. Does it again. Does it again. So all you're doing is coming into a portal of communication. So once you get the portal communication lines are set, the track location set, and 1/3 line ground communication lines are setting, you open up the portal, you go through the portal, 3 lines of signal location setting, 45 lines of flux. Process indication setting, you come into the convergence system, all 3 body line frame communications, opens all line communication setting, and travels in that communication to stargates and portals. Process indication lines, that calculates lines of 1/6. Inhibitors over 3/center. Operation lines of sequence. Platforms over E factors over screen locations, and 45 communication setting to travel. Directing signal location setting grounds a highline signal location system, all through convergence system, all through attractions. Your Earth. See, your Earth. There's your Earth. Booyah. So your body rotates the cycles and creates the Earth of platforms and line condition setting that connects to all communication and code weaving your location setting to position location and crop circles. Directing clocking centers of 1 cycle, platforms over 4 centers, set lines of sequence location propellers, they operate with calculated screen lines adaptations of the flux over set attractions, all through anomaly. Rotate the cycles in pyramid activation, row line centers, and clocking center core center communication system out through attractions. Okay? Rotate the spin cycles, clock and dagger lines of 1/sequence, platforms over line circulation, rotation lines of surface and traction. Directing lines, anomaly line switch, process lines of indication lines of red over line and rotation. Outside line condition, inside flux over line rotation center the surface. Sets calculation grounds, and set lines of communication system and conversion system and travel. Okay? So that's what goes on with your body in set travel. It goes through its own portal. It goes through its own mapping system, line condition setting. Okay? So once it identifies its film strip, it's much easier to go through its portal to higher lines of frequencies and grounds. But you understand 3 lines of measure, 4 lines of box frames, in line communications, what goes inside is what goes outside and travel. Now, if you can understand the flux over 3, then you can understand the 3 lines of 6 over lines of 12. This sets coordinates communication setting and outline setting location of setting and travel that points lines of system locate inside rotation system, all through track location system, all through computer operation, which is your particle setting, all through triangulation flux. And then you bring it outside lines and single location system, all through travel. Okay, and then you get into a window frame, box frame, correlation lines of track frame, and 3 signals and communication. Working with that line signals, graphed its communication lines of dimensional doors and communication location grid. Door sequence lines of 1 over line cross lines of 2 over lines of flux over lines of 3 line signal location setting over line rotation centers, process indication system, all through travel communication. Okay? Inside rotation lines of sight line. Very powerful stuff when you send platforms like communication online centers and 45 communication and surface. Rotate the cycles, rotate the line grounds into graph and screen adaptations into your set triangle. Okay, rotate the cycles, triangulation over lines, 0 lines of 1, off lines of 2, off lines of 3, metric meters, model construction of 3 centers of travel, directing ground signal location setting, high signal location on clock line or rotation surface and traction. Portal communication line direct signal as the grounds. Okay. Or platforms like communication inside your Earth. Okay? So it's very powerful when you come in that positions, guys. Know exactly what's going on with your platforms and traction. Okay? But you have to understand how to use your formulas and equations and set travel. All right? So just gives you an understand how to keep yourself in more control of everything you do through drawings, through schematics, location, and cycle. All right? That's it. See you in 5.